Tiny, white, and marketed as a miracle, a safe, non-addictive treatment for morning sickness. Doctors recommended it. Pregnant women took it, trusting the label, the science, the system. And then the babies were born, with no arms, no legs, malformed ears, missing organs, all because of that pill, thalidomide. In Europe, the tragedy unfolded quickly. Thousands of infants were born with severe birth defects. In America, a similar disaster nearly happened, but didn't, thanks to one woman who said no. This is the story of a drug that promised comfort but delivered catastrophe, and the quiet hero who stopped it from becoming even worse. To understand how a safe pill got so far and why it took so long for anyone to say something, we need to go back to the late 1950s, a time of blind trust in medicine and of consequences no one saw coming. The 1950s were a golden age of medicine. Penicillin had saved millions in World War II. Vaccines were ending childhood diseases. Science, it seemed, could do no wrong. People trusted their doctors, and doctors trusted the pharmaceutical industry. Into this moment of optimism came thalidomide. First developed by a German company called Chemie Grünenthal, thalidomide was originally marketed as a mild sedative, but soon it was found to help relieve nausea during pregnancy, a godsend for women struggling with morning sickness. The drug was easy to manufacture, cheap to distribute, and heavily advertised as completely safe, even for pregnant women. It had not been tested on pregnant animals, but back then that wasn't required. By 1957, thalidomide hit the market in West Germany and quickly spread to over 46 countries, including the UK, Canada, Australia, and much of Europe. Doctors loved it. Women loved it. No one questioned it. But in the United States, something unusual happened. A pharmaceutical company called Richardson Merrill submitted an application to the FDA in 1960 to bring thalidomide to American shelves under the name Kevadon. At the time, the FDA's drug approval process was far more relaxed than today. Companies didn't have to prove safety in pregnancy. In fact, drugs were often approved in weeks, with very little scrutiny. But one reviewer, Dr. Francis Oldham Kelsey, a newly hired FDA medical officer, noticed something troubling. The company had submitted glowing reviews from doctors in Europe, but offered almost no clinical trial data, especially regarding effects on pregnant women. When she asked for more information, they pushed back. Hard. They called her overly cautious, bureaucratic, unreasonable. But Dr. Kelsey refused to approve the drug. She asked again and again for proper safety data. And as the months passed, reports from Europe began to surface. Babies being born with missing limbs, no ears, twisted spines, and every single case linked to thalidomide. Thanks to her persistence, thalidomide was never officially approved in the US. But that didn't mean America escaped unscathed. Because while the system held the line, barely, cracks still formed, and some lives still slipped through. The story of thalidomide is not just about a drug, it's about trust. It's about science, unchecked. And it's about how one pill, given with the best of intentions, led to some of the most devastating birth defects the modern world had ever seen. In the late 1950s, thalidomide swept through Europe like a miracle. Pregnant women suffering from morning sickness were finally offered relief. No more constant nausea, no more sleepless nights, just one small pill, marketed as safe, even soothing. But beneath the polished advertisements and smiling pharmaceutical reps was a drug that had never been properly tested for its effects during pregnancy. Animal trials? Minimal. Human trials? Lacking. It was approved based on assumption and corporate pressure, not science. Within 2 years of its release, something horrifying began to surface. Across Germany, the UK, Australia, and Canada, babies were being born with severe deformities. Tiny flipper-like arms or legs, missing limbs altogether, malformed ears, or blindness. In some cases, babies were born without any limbs at all. The condition became known as phocomelia. Doctors were baffled. Parents were devastated. and pharmaceutical companies deflected. It took time, but researchers eventually traced the outbreak to a common link: thalidomide. By then, it was too late. More than 10,000 babies were born with thalidomide-related deformities worldwide. Countless others died in the womb. Mothers had no idea the drug they took would change their child's life before it even began. And yet, somehow, the United States was spared the full weight of this tragedy. And the reason? One woman, Dr. Frances Oldham Kelsey. When Richardson Merrill submitted their application to bring thalidomide to the U.S. under the name Kevadon, they expected quick approval. The company even began distributing millions of sample pills to American doctors, confident that FDA approval was imminent. But Dr. Kelsey, newly hired at the FDA, didn't like what she saw. The company's data was vague, the animal testing incomplete, and no studies had been done on pregnant women. Her concerns were dismissed by the company, but she stood her ground. While thalidomide was causing birth defects across the world, Kelsey kept asking questions. She became a target of pressure campaigns, lobbying, and even ridicule. But she never gave in. And then the reports started arriving, from Germany, from Australia, from Canada, case after case of phocomelia, all tied to thalidomide. Kelsey refused to budge. She delayed the approval process long enough for the disaster overseas to come to light. In the end, the FDA never approved thalidomide for general use in the U.S. Because of her, the country narrowly escaped what could have been tens of thousands of birth defects. But not all were spared. While the drug was never formally approved, the samples that Richardson Merrill distributed freely were still out there. Doctors, unaware of the risks, gave them to pregnant women. Some women, trusting their physicians, took them. By the time the FDA finally issued a nationwide warning, at least 17 American children had been born with thalidomide-related deformities. Some experts believe the real number may be higher. Those children and their families were left to grapple with a tragedy that, while smaller in scale than Europe's, was no less painful. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the damage was massive. Entire generations of children were born disabled. Many were hidden away by families, institutionalized, or outright abandoned. Others became symbols of survival and strength, their stories demanding justice. But justice was slow. Pharmaceutical companies, including Chemie Grunenthal, spent decades denying liability. In some countries, families fought for 30, 40, even 50 years before receiving compensation. Some are still waiting. Thalidomide itself was eventually banned in most countries, though later repurposed in highly controlled settings to treat diseases like leprosy and cancer. As for Dr. Frances Kelsey, she became a quiet American hero. In 1962, President John F. Kennedy awarded her the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service. She was only the second woman ever to receive it. Kelsey went on to reshape the FDA's drug approval process. Because of her and the lessons of thalidomide, the Kefauver-Harris Amendment was passed, requiring drug companies to prove both safety and effectiveness before approval. Pregnant women became a protected class in medical research. The idea of just assuming it's safe was no longer acceptable. But even with reform, the scars remain for the families who lost children, for the ones who survived with lifelong disabilities, for the mothers who blamed themselves, not knowing they were misled. The story of thalidomide is a reminder that science without humility can be dangerous, that marketing without oversight can be lethal, and that sometimes all it takes to stop a national tragedy is one person who refuses to look away. Today, thalidomide is a ghost that still lingers in global drug policy. It changed how we approve medicine, how we talk about pregnancy and safety, and how we define medical ethics. It also changed thousands of lives forever, many of whom never got to speak for themselves. And all of it because of a pill that was supposed to help. The thalidomide tragedy was a turning point, not just in medicine, but in how we define trust, responsibility, and accountability. In the United States, the near miss led to sweeping reform. By 1962, Congress passed the Kefauver-Harris Amendments, which radically transformed the way drugs were approved. For the first time, pharmaceutical companies were legally required to prove that a drug was both safe and effective before it could be sold. No more relying on marketing claims, no more blind faith in clinical letters. The burden of proof shifted to those who made the pills. The FDA gained real authority. Informed consent became law. And for the first time, pregnant women were recognized as a vulnerable population, deserving of special protection in medical research. These were major steps forward, but elsewhere in the world, the wounds remained open. In Germany, the UK, Australia, and Canada, families of thalidomide survivors struggled, not just with medical needs, but with silence. Companies refused to take responsibility. Governments dragged their feet. Legal battles stretched on for decades. Some victims were hidden away by ashamed families. Others were institutionalized. Many never received financial compensation, medical care, or even public acknowledgement. And while thalidomide was eventually banned in most countries, it was later reintroduced in tightly controlled settings to treat leprosy and certain cancers. Its toxic legacy became a reminder that even the most dangerous substances can be rehabilitated when profits are at stake. But perhaps the deepest lesson isn't about the pill itself. It's about the danger of unchecked optimism, of assuming that if something is new or scientific or comes in a clean white bottle, it must be good. It's about how easy it is to dismiss women's voices until tragedy forces us to listen. And it's about the quiet power of ethical resistance. Because for every reform law that was passed, there was first a child born without limbs, and a mother asking why no one warned her. And when the truth finally surfaced, there was only one question that echoed louder than all the apologies. How did this happen? When Dr. Frances Kelsey refused to sign that approval form, she didn't just protect data, she protected lives. One woman, standing alone in a system built for speed, profit, and pressure, changed the course of American medical history. But in Europe, Canada, Australia, the tragedy unfolded anyway. Over 10,000 children were born with catastrophic birth defects. Thousands of families were left with no answers, only grief. Thalidomide didn't just deform limbs. It deformed trust in science, in medicine, in the systems meant to protect us. This isn't just a story from the past. It's a reminder of how fragile accountability can be and how dangerous it is when no one is asking questions. Thanks for listening to Dark History. If this story moved you, share it, because even when the damage is done, the truth still deserves a voice.